WTBC's top 20 playlists. Below the top 20, they got WTBC pick hits, and they do this all. They did this. You don't see this anymore. This hadn't been done in years, but back in the 60s, the DJs would make their pick hits. And although I think BBC's Radio 1, they were still doing that as of when I last listened to their regular programming back in 2009, 2010, the DJs there would make a pick hit, but not done here in America anymore. But back in the 60s, of course, it was done. And the pick hits, WTBC's pick hits, the DJ Joe Moore, he chooses Tracey Day's Teenage Cleopatra. I live for songs like this. I love it. I love these bubblegum girl group records. Yes, these obscure girl group records. Teenage Cleopatra. Tracey Day, she was from New York City, and boy, she had some luck. Big time luck. Bob Crew, producer of the Four Seasons, came across a demo she made. Bob Crew signed her to his production company called Genius Incorporated, and he had her record a song called Jerry, I'm Your Sherry, which was the answer song to Sherry by the Four Seasons. And for those of you who are way too young to remember, back in the 50s, particularly back in the 50s, but also in the 60s, maybe a little bit to a lesser extent in the 60s, there was the big hit and there was the answer songs. And that was the answer song. It was released off the VJ record label. That was the Four Seasons record label, but it was not a hit. She released another song off the VJ record label. It was not a hit. She signed with Liberty Records, and she hit pay dirt with Teenage Cleopatra. Well, relatively speaking, it didn't make the top 40. Written by Beverly Ross. Beverly Ross, who wrote the song, well, she didn't write the whole thing. She co-wrote the song Lollipop by the Chordads. And Teenage Cleopatra only went to number 75 on Billboard's Hot 100. It still makes it more of a jam, more than anything else. She recorded about 9 solo singles between 1962 through 1963. Here Comes the Boy was the follow-up. That went to number 93. But she also recorded a version called Gonna Get Along Without You Now. Remember, that was one of the catchiest records originally done by Teresa Brewer back in 1952, but made into another hit. Made into a hit in the rock and roll era by Patience and Prudence. Anybody remembers Patience and Prudence back in the mid-50s? Well, they did a version of that. And went to number 11. That was in 1956. Skeeter Davis did a nice version of this record, too. Gonna Get Along Without You Now back in 1964, but her version didn't make top 40 either. But about 9 singles until about 1966. Most of her singles were written by Bob Crew and a guy named Bob Gaudio. I hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly. I got a pronunciation disability. Gaudio. I'll just pronounce it as Gaudio. Bob Gaudio was the principal songwriter of the Four Seasons, keyboard player of the Four Seasons. That's it. I gotta read you this lyric though. This is a cliche, but they don't make them like this anymore, for better or for worse. But let me bring it up for you. Bring up the lyrics to Teenage Cleopatra. This is how it starts. Boy, it's heartbreaking though. All right, check this out. He called me his Teenage Cleopatra. He called me his princess of the Nile. He called me the queen of all his treasure, Cleopatra. Said I'd rule his world with only my smile. But I laughed at him, and I say to myself, isn't he silly, and doesn't he talk kind of wild? But then, one day, I saw him walking down the street with another girl, and I could see they were in love. Now he calls her his Teenage Cleopatra. He calls her his Princess of the Nile. And I cried. How I cried. Because I see lost him now. Now that it's too late, and I know he'll never be mine. It's crushing. Absolutely crushing. And I'll be dang, man. Nice record. Yes. Seldom hear it on the Odie stations, but you know Mr. DJ's going to bring it back for you. Teenage Cleopatra, which was a WTBC pick hit by DJ Joe Moore back in 1963. Tracey Day.